Okay, so picture this, a quiet little town in Atchison, Kansas. And in that town, there's this house. A house with a seriously dark secret. The story you think you know starts with a ghost of a little girl, but it ends with something much, much worse. Today, we're going to break down one of the most violent and well-documented hauntings in American history, the Sallie House. So the story that everyone knows, right? It all kicks off with this classic, creepy image. You see the face of a little girl peeking out of a window. And that's supposed to be Sallie, the tragic ghost child, forever trapped inside those walls. It's the kind of ghost story you've heard a million times.
But, and here's where it gets really interesting. What if that whole story is just wrong? What if the idea of this sad little ghost girl was actually just a cover, a mask for something way, way more sinister? Well, that is the real story we're getting into today, the truly disturbing story of the Sallie House.
Okay, so to really get what went down here, we've got to start by taking apart the popular myth, the story that put this house on the map in the first place. And the legend, it's so specific, you can almost see it play out. You've got this doctor, right? He's in the house, it's the middle of the night, and he's doing an emergency appendectomy on a little girl named Sallie. And it goes horribly wrong. She dies right there. It's the perfect, tragic backstory for a haunting, right? A restless little spirit who just never left.
Yeah, there's just one tiny problem with that perfect story. While yes, a Dr. Finney did live there and have a practice, when you actually look at the historical records, there's nothing. No evidence, no mention of a girl named Sallie ever living there, being treated there, or dying there. So that begs the question. If it wasn't Sallie, then who, or maybe more importantly, what was really in that house?
This is where Tony and Deborah Pickman come in. They're a young couple, they move into the house back in the early 90s, and they're expecting their first kid. Now, their whole dynamic is absolutely key to this story. You see, Deborah, she was always interested in the paranormal, kind of open to it. Tony, on the other hand, complete skeptic. And that difference between them, well, it's going to become terrifyingly important. So when things first started happening, it was all pretty subtle. The kind of stuff you could just shrug off. It all starts out like these innocent little games, before it shows its true, much darker colors.
It started with all the classic stuff, right? The lights would flicker, their new baby was always crying in the nursery. Even their dog would just stand there and bark at what seemed like nothing in the nursery doorway. And at first you could explain every single bit of it away. Bad wiring, a drafty old house, a fussy baby. You wouldn't jump straight to hunting, right? Not yet anyway. And then this happened. The teddy bears. This is the moment where explainable just goes right out the window. The toys move once. Okay, maybe you're imagining things. But for them to be put away and then rearrange themselves again, twice, in just a few minutes? This was the first thing that Tony and Deborah just had no explanation for. This felt intentional. And pretty soon after that, things got way more personal. And it really started to focus on Tony. He'd hear footsteps on the stairs, think, oh, it's just the cats. But then he'd look, and there was nothing. And then came this experience, a physical feeling, that cold wind, and a sound that couldn't be explained. This wasn't just about moving toys anymore. This presence was now actively interacting with him.
So yeah, this was a huge turning point. Whatever playful, childlike stuff was happening, that was over. The entity, whatever it was now zeroing in on Tony. And the whole vibe shifted from just mischievous to, well, openly violent. The weird little things happening around the house, they escalated. We're talking direct physical attacks now. Whatever was in that house had picked its target. This incident, this was the first time it really crossed the line. It wasn't just a cold spot or feeling a little push. This was a physical mark left on his skin. And Tony was absolutely certain she bit him. So at this point, they're still thinking it's the little girl, Sallie. But that bite mark, that was just the beginning. Soon after, the scratches started. Just these deep, red marks appearing on his body out of nowhere. Sometimes they'd bleed, sometimes they came with this sharp, stinging pain. And other times, no pain at all. They would just be there. It became this relentless physical assault, and it was all aimed directly at him. And then we get to this moment, which was actually caught on camera for the TV show Sightings. While the cameras are literally rolling, these scratches appear on Tony's body, and they form the initials MC. Now,
What's the big deal? Well, the guy who built the house, his name was Michael C. Finney. I mean, talk about a chilling connection. It's just undeniable.
Look, the physical attacks were absolutely terrifying, but they were nothing compared to the psychological war that came next. You know, some people theorize that these entities feed on fear, or maybe poltergeist activity is somehow fueled by a living person's own energy. Who knows? But whatever the reason, this thing wasn't just invading Tony's house anymore. It was invading his mind.
So Tony starts seeing things, and we're not just talking about the ghost of a little girl anymore. No, this was like a shape-shifting parade of pure nightmare fuel. He saw a doppelganger of his own wife, a terrifying old woman who tried to choke him, and then this, a monster on all fours. This was not the ghost of a child. This was something that could literally mess with his perception of reality.
In this is where the story gets really, really dark. It wasn't just whispers in the walls anymore. Now it was these intrusive, violent thoughts in his head. Thoughts about hurting his own wife, Deborah. The entity wasn't just trying to scare him anymore. It felt like it was trying to use him, to turn him into a weapon.
I mean, these are his own words. He's describing this intense anger that he knew wasn't his. This darkness that would just wash over him whenever he was in that house. He could feel himself losing control.
And this was the horrifying result of all that. He experienced a blackout, and when he came to, he found their family cat stabbed with a kitchen knife. He had absolutely no memory of doing it, but he was convinced it was him. The entity had finally succeeded. It had used his hands to do something violent. That awful, tragic event, that was the beginning of the end. The family knew they had to get out. But escaping that house, and whatever was inside it, it wasn't going to be easy. You know, for Deborah, who had kind of been fascinated by all this at first, this was the moment the fascination turned to pure terror. Seeing her husband physically get thrown into the banister with enough force to break it, that was it. That was the final terrifying proof. They had to get out. Now. So years after the Pickmans fled, the house became this huge hotspot for paranormal investigators. And look, most of the evidence you can debate back and forth. But there is one piece of audio, and it was captured by the guys from the Astonishing Legends podcast, who are usually pretty skeptical. And the host's reaction, it tells you everything you need to know. This was different. So what they did was they put a digital recorder in that same empty nursery, and it was voice activated, so it would only record if it picked up a sound. They left the room completely empty, completely silent. And so the question that's kind of haunted this case ever since is, when that recorder turned on, whose voice did it capture?